Guess we better let George in. George Van Horn. Awesome. Okay, well, in the spirit of not taking everyone's not taking too much time or the allotted time that we have, I will go ahead and get started. So thank you to those who are so far on this call. My name is Grace Kessler, and I see many familiar names and faces, and so it's nice to see you virtually on this very sad rainy day. Glad we didn't have to get out in that, but we are excited to host today just a quick panel and information session on hiring individuals with disabilities. And so October is many things, but one of those is Disability Employment Awareness Month. And so us at the Arc, we are here to share a little bit about, what that means to our community and how we can be the best employers. And if you're not an employer on the call, as well, a family member or an individual themselves with disabilities, we believe that you will gain a wealth of information from this call, no matter what area you're coming from. So I have got a couple slides I just want to share real quick to share about who we are. So again, I'm from the Arc of Bartholomew County, and our mission here is to promote and protect the human rights of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so we consider ourselves what we call an advocacy chapter. We're a very small organization, just myself and then another part-time individual, and we support self-advocates and families in our community, providing them with education and tools for everything from employment to how to fill out the Medicaid waiver application or how to apply for Social Security. And so we field some of these wraparound services, or referral services is what we often tend to do. We know there are some really great service providers and other agencies in our community that can provide those more in-depth services. So we do a lot of that as well. We also focus on public policy. Obviously, a lot of our barriers to inclusion or equitable access, unfortunately, do stem from public policy. So whether that's income gaps to employment, to receive Medicaid waiver or to receive health care, whatever that may be. So we really try to advocate at the local level and all across Indiana and the United States, as well as the ARC is a national organization. We host a lot of awareness events, trainings for parents. We have a self-advocates group. Self-advocates are what we call adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. They come together about once a month and do everything from socialize to volunteer and just learn from each other and their peers. And so a few general statistics I always find interesting to share is that according to most data, about 1 in 4 individuals has some type of disability. And so when I say a disability, this could be a more visual disability, or actually like a visual impairment, or an invisible disability, or something that's maybe a little more obvious. For example, I use a wheelchair, so my disability is a little more obvious. But that number is pretty consistent across the globe. Communities who unfortunately are communities of lower income levels, or countries with lower levels of income or who are in poverty, you see higher numbers of disability. And that's just due to lack of access to healthcare. Again, some of that public policy information, and lack of maybe education and understanding around disability. And so here in Columbus, we help to create awareness around disability in general, and then also reduce and eliminate some of those myths and stigmas around disabilities, and helping others understand that just because someone might have a disability, whatever type it might be, doesn't mean that they could not be, a great employee and participate actively in our community. Just another little tidbit more related to the labor force. This data is a little outdated, but I'm hoping now with the census done and some of that updated data we'll have some newer information, but I'm sure it will be the same because not a lot of public policy has changed. And so we find individuals with disabilities are often very underemployed. Couple parts due to that. One of those pieces might be the barrier to finding that employment or the barrier for employers to actually hire, which we'll talk about with our panelists. The other piece of it is the worry that they might lose their resources and their benefits. If they go out and get a job and start working so many hours, that Medicaid resource or those benefits start to cut back. And so it's kind of a tough situation that we're in, but that is just a little bit of data that I think helps frame this conversation. So I just had a couple slides and I will go back to our wonderful faces. And so today, as I said, the main goal is that we wanted to have a discussion and a time for question and answer with a couple of our community members. And while we have about 3 panelists, feel free to chime in on the chat, or I think you can raise your hand virtually, or just chime in if you have a question that pops up and you'd like to know more about it. And so I am going to let our panelists introduce themselves, and I am so happy that they are here today. We have Mary Hamlin, Rebekah Walsh, and Dennis Heathfield, very active members of our community, and I'm excited to chat with them. So Mary, if you want to go first.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. I am Mary Hamlin. I am the Bcsc Transition Coordinator. That position allows me to work with the community and making sure that our students with disabilities are leaving school and becoming active community members. So either with education, into employment, or maybe into the military. So.
All right, what about you, Rebekah? Would you like to introduce yourself?
Good morning. Well, I'm sorry, good afternoon. My name is Rebekah Walsh. I'm the Director of Volunteer Services at Columbus Regional Health. And my role is to work with Mary quite a bit with some of our students that come in for some work practice here at CRH. I also consider volunteer services to be a little mini HR department because we hire, onboard, train, and we sometimes do fire volunteers. Doesn't happen very often, but I'm really pleased to be here and thank you for having me.
Awesome. So Rebekah, I'll just chime in real quick. Rebekah mentioned a really good point. We will talk a lot about hiring individuals with disabilities, but internships and volunteer opportunities are also great ways that we will mention. So the advice will kind of span across those areas. So Dennis?
Hey, everybody. Thanks, Grace. My name is Dennis Heathfield. I'm a member of the Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion team at Cummins, and I have among my responsibilities the privilege of leading our global disability inclusion initiative. I've been at Cummins for 27 years, and this is my first HR kind of role. All of the roles I had before this one were in the business. In the last 15 years or so, we're leading fairly large chunks of our organization in general management positions. And I came into this space, if I might share just a little bit about my story, Grace.
Please, yeah.
It kind of begins with the fact that I have a disability myself. I have a hearing disability. I've been wearing hearing aids for about 40 years, so I have at least some experience with one dimension of disability. And I have to give a shout out to one of the guests here, George Van Horn. George and I have become really close friends over the last 20 years that we've known each other, and through that relationship, I've had the opportunity to learn a little bit more about some of the challenges and barriers that kids with disabilities faces are going through school. and particularly, when they're trying to make the transition from, being done with school to employment, or even, into next level education. And then I had some other experiences inside of Cummins where I had the opportunity to learn more about the amount of employee activity that we have taking place in the disability area around the world at the grassroots level. And all of these experiences, plus the fact that we continue to be very underrepresented by people with disabilities at Cummins, led me and a colleague of mine, Kelly Kreveling, back in 2016 to write a white paper on disability inclusion, what it could look like at Cummins. And we put together some recommendations for our senior leaders, and they endorsed what we had to say. And that's essentially what created the position. I was seriously advocating for me to be put in the role behind the scenes, and so I happened to be in the right place at the right time, and here I am. So I'm really happy to be here today and look forward to the conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dennis. And we appreciate you being here, as well as Mary and Rebekah. And so you probably noticed Dennis is with Cummins and Rebekah with CRH. And Mary's role is a little different, being with Bcsc and a transition coordinator. And so transitioning students out of high school to find those roles. But they will all be chiming in with some good thoughts. And so the first question I have, and you can feel free to fight over who wants to answer which one first, or I can call you out. But just in general, as a community, why do you feel it's important for a company or for a community agency, whatever it may be, to encourage and promote hiring people with disabilities?
I'll go first. I just want to, break the ice, get it out there. So being in a healthcare system, I mean, one of the things that's most important to us is we need to have a staff that reflects the community in all areas. And so, the more diverse our workforce is, the more we can obtain the different ideas, opinions about how we can enhance our services. We are a service industry to meet the needs of the community and all those that we serve.
And I feel it's really important that everyone has a role in our community. I think our community is as strong as each and every one of our members in our community. And so if we are involving and giving space for everyone to be involved, then we have a stronger, better community.
Yeah, if I can just maybe add a little bit to Rebekah and Mary's comments. I think, the way we think about it at Cummins is there's a case to be made from a social justice aspect. And, just Grace, you gave an example with the employment numbers. I mean, it's just not acceptable that the rate of employment for people with disabilities continues after all these years, after the Americans with Disabilities Act, all the work that's been done for the unemployment rate to be what it is. And there's, that manifests itself in bad ways in lots of different dimensions. From a business perspective, we know that we're a better company the more diverse and inclusive we are. There's lots of external surveys that show that companies that are more diverse and inclusive perform better for their stakeholders, not just financially, but in terms of talent acquisition and talent retention, all sorts of ways. So by not having representative numbers of people with disabilities inside of Cummins, we're missing out on that dimension of diversity and unique skills and experiences, innovation that could be helping to make us better.
Grace, if I may chime in, my name is Jessica Smith. I work with Rebekah over at CRH and Human Resources. So I'm the actual HR. as opposed to what Rebekah does over there, which I think is probably a little more fun than mine. And I would echo exactly what Dennis said. Through all of my business school, there's an economics piece to it. So there's a definite business case. I mean, there's a lot with social justice and things like that. There's also a business case. We don't have enough workers in the workforce right now. So if you just look at sheer numbers, if we can identify a larger population of individuals that can come and be workers for us, that makes us a better, in our case, a better employer. We can provide services to our customers, patients, whatever you want to call them. They're going to find the same thing at Cummins. Every business has a challenge right now in finding workers. And so the more populations that you can open up to be able to employ them, that means that we can run our business better. So there's a pure economics besides the right thing to do to our community. So yeah, there's definitely a lot that. So if you want to talk to a numbers piece, there's definitely that component as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica, so much, and everyone for your comments. Dennis said a buzzword that I wanted to just elaborate on a little bit, which was innovation. We often think about maybe the concerns or the worries about hiring someone with a disability, but we overlook the innovation that it can bring to our company. For instance, I'll use another company that we aren't, let's just call it Apple, since they're always all over the news. You know, they're creating phones. If they are not actively ensuring that they have people with disabilities on their staff to practice using the apps, to help them understand how their phones can be more accessible, to make sure that their website's accessible, then they might not be reaching the best target. And to that point about numbers, if you're not making your product accessible or you're not doing that, then you're not selling it. And so I guarantee that they are actively thinking about that. And so, and to others who have mentioned that, you know, if their staff and their employees don't represent the people that they're trying to serve, or customers or clients, then it might be hard to connect with those customers or clients. And so it goes a little bit of both ways. And so even though, you know, Cummins, they, you know, they sell engines, and you might wonder, well, how does that affect someone with a disability? It's more than that. You know, it's understanding the communities and the individuals who are potentially customers and clients, and where those engines are going, and how important that, I guess, that the end product is. And so it's just wanted to mention a little more on innovation.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess along the lines of that, we've talked a little bit about how important it is for businesses to do this. Can you touch on a little bit of your specific company and maybe, or business, or what you have done or the overall agency to maybe ensure that your company is more inclusive, or that once someone is hired, they feel welcome, whether that be best practices or just culture changes that you've really tried to change over the years?
So I'll start, and I'll preface this by, I've already shared our representation numbers, which are in the U.S. we have in the neighborhood of around 2% of our employees self-identify as having a disability, and that's the only way we can collect the information. And there's a whole bunch of challenges associated with self-identification. There's very likely more than 2%, but the fact that they aren't self-identifying is a whole other, you know, sort of challenge to be solved. But some of the things that we've done, Grace, I think at the very you know, at the very top is having leaders step forward to say that this is going to be a focus area for us. So our CFO, our Chief Financial Officer, Mark Smith, is the executive sponsor for our overall disability inclusion initiative. He communicates with the organization on a regular basis. I know because I attend his town halls every quarter. he frequently talks about his role as the sponsor of our disability inclusion initiative. We've also put him front and center with some external partners, just to have conversations and talk strategy with other organizations about what we're trying to do collectively. So I think having really clear leadership engagement. We've also got a couple of other really senior leaders that are very actively involved in this effort. So I think that's one thing that has changed in the last couple of years. I mentioned communications. So again, this is all about creating awareness, educating people, putting disability inclusion in front of people on a regular basis in our corporate communications. We have a communication plan, a global communication plan that we execute on an annual basis. So we're talking about disability inclusion on a regular basis. The other thing that I would point to is the work we've done in our physical facilities around making sure they're accessible for people of all abilities. And with COVID and a lot of people working from home, some of the changes that we've made haven't been fully realized yet. But I just had an example the other day of one of our small facilities in southern Indiana, where we installed automatic doors on the restroom, and a gentleman there with a disability that I communicate with on a regular basis shared with me, kind of out of the blue, the unintended benefit of having this automatic door. And he said, in the past, I've noticed some people don't wash their hands after they use the restroom, and then they grab the handle, and then the next guy's the person that scrubs and rubs their hands, and then they grab the door that this other person just used. He said that's all gone away now. So it was the curb cut effect kind of thing. So that a lot of the improvements that we've made to our facilities benefit more than just people with disabilities. The other thing I would point out is we've greatly expanded our employee resource group network. It's more than doubled in the last 2 years, both in the US and outside of the US. So the employee resource groups, in addition to providing a place where people with common interests and concerns can come together, sort of in a safe space, they're also a terrific resource for the business when it comes to things like getting input on accessibility or helping with talent acquisition efforts and so forth. So those are a few things that we've done.
I'd like to add on to what Dennis was saying. We've, in terms of leadership, in the past 12 plus months, we have enlisted a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant to help us do a thorough assessment of employment and patient care environment, continue to address the areas of opportunity. But we've actually started with the steering committee of people throughout the organization to get their voices. And now that we're wrapping up the consultants' surveying work to get into the actual work, Jim Bickle was just on a call I was on before this, where he said he's the chairman of the committee and he is the CEO of the hospital. But we also have, other leadership that have made this a priority. Julie McGregor, who is the VP over Jessica's area. She's in HR vice president. She's made this a priority. My vice president, Julia Badian, who is over community partnerships and community relationships, has also made this a priority. So it's sort of it's ongoing, as Dennis alluded to. It doesn't just stop and end, but we've made a conscious effort to work with our consultant, have leadership be available, and look at the opportunities that present themselves with patient experience and employment. Jessica, did you want to add anything to that? I feel like I've got like a backup here, right? Just think, in case I miss something, I've got my own backup here.
No, I think there's a lot that we're doing in general, where we're trying to really do employee engagement. So what does that first 30, 60, 90 days look like? And it's been something we're tackling across the house.
Right.
So that's So there are ripple effects based on the things that we're trying to do for every employee that walks in the door. There will be ripple effects. We're also trying, a thing that we're saying a lot with not only our employees, but our patients and any members of our workforce is meeting people where they are.
Right.
So it's not just, you know, I'm going to give you a checklist, Rebekah, to onboard your new employee. And that checklist is going to give you general guidelines, but recognize that there may be something special you need to do with this employee or with that employee. And so I'm giving you a guideline. It's not meant to be, you follow it word for word, please. Recognize you may need to do something different with this employee. And that's something we love checklists apparently over here. So that's something we're trying to get them to understand. I need you to think about it a little individually. And so that's something that we're still working on with all of our teams and ourselves. I think we all like a checklist usually. So.
And in my role,
go ahead, Mary.
Well, I was just saying, in my role with BCSC, what I found really helpful is that businesses are reaching out. So they're starting kind of with our students, and that we can come in as educators of people of all abilities, but specifically disabilities, that we can come in and share our knowledge of how we've been able to make education accessible, and now how can we make employment accessible as well and support our community. And that is one thing that's a goal for BCSC, is that we want to be a community support, so that as kids are being successful within our educational field, now how do we help them become successful in our community? And we want to be that resource.
I think that's perfect. And I actually just want to expand on asking a follow-up question on that. And so something I've heard many times from individuals with disabilities who are applying for a job often feel like maybe the application process is truly a barrier. Maybe they have a learning disability and they just can't get through the application process. They can do the job, but they can't get through the application process. Or maybe a typical interview style that we're used to just won't work for someone. Are there accommodations that you have made on a person-to-person basis or as an organization overall based on some of those observations?
I'll go first again. I keep looking to see who's going to talk. So we're in the process of reevaluating our application based upon exactly what Grace just said. Removing a portion of the requirements to make it simpler and shorter to complete. And I'm going to let Jessica, she does the recruitment. I'm working with volunteers, but with that application, we've also, with the pandemic, had to really change how we interview and how we recruit and onboard our staff. So I think that it's not just looking at it from the persons with disability needs, but also just the general employment needs. We're bringing on several hundred employees every year. How do you do that when you are basically not doing things in person? I think it's been a challenge. Jessica, I'll let you add on to that.
Sure. Some of you may have seen in the news recently, we started a group called Sidekick Staffing, and it's really short-term temporary staffing. You can do 2 or 3 hour shifts. And so we didn't want those individuals to have to go through a full application process. So we started this very small website where we're just having people send in what they're interested in and a resume. And we contact them and we kind of identify where they might be a match. It was wildly successful for a variety of reasons, but we're also looking at that same type of model for applications. So instead of a lengthy application that we all love, they would fill out what they're looking for, how many hours a week, a very basic thing. And then a member of our staff would contact them and find out what they're looking for. Is it direct patient care? Is it sitting at a desk? What is it that you want to do? What type of interaction are you looking for? What type of skills or certifications do you have? And then proceed from there. So it's a little less away from our team sitting back and reading a document and deciding what that person is going to do, and instead asking. So we're trying to go to that model. It's here in Columbus. I don't know that we're doing it a lot. It's very popular, probably along the East Coast and the West Coast right now. So trying to get to that a little bit more model that might be a little more progressive for us. I think with interviews, again, this has nothing to do with who the candidate is in front of us. We're just trying to get our leaders to kind of open their eyes to the person sitting in front of them. And does that person look uncomfortable? Do they not understand the question? Okay, I need to change the question, or can I phrase it differently? And I don't know that that's something that we've done very well in the past. Here's my list of questions, and it's like my checklist. And so opening eyes. So I don't know that I have an exact example of what we've done, but for me, it's making sure that the leaders are recognizing the person across from them, and figuring out maybe when they're not comfortable or when they can't answer a question, or understanding that their experience isn't going to come from a paid job. It's going to come from volunteering at the hospital. It's volunteering in a school library or whatever. Those are the barriers that we tend to find ourselves in, is the recognizing that the experience is not always going to be that last paid job.
So some of the
Mary, did you want to go? I feel like you're getting in here in last place all the time.
No, I'm good. It's because I'm not an employer. I'm part of the process, so you're fine.
So Grace, a couple of things I would add, a couple of examples I would use about how we've made or trying to make the application process, if you will, a little more accessible. So I had a meeting about a month ago with our talent acquisition organization, and they walked me through the changes that we've made to our portal, our online portal that people use for applying to jobs. And they explained to me the changes that they've made to sort of compress the process, make it easier. But I can't give you the details. I just know that we've done something to make it a lot easier. We also, if people need an accommodation, there's a button people can push on and say, hey, I need an accommodation for the process. And then we also use this really cool online tool called Accessibility. It's like a little beetle that's floating around on the left-hand side of the screen. And if you press on that little beetle, it opens up all these different things that can help make the material easier to consume if you have a visual disability. So those are some really simplistic things that we've done. We haven't gotten yet to really thinking to some of the things Jessica was mentioning about how do we, instead of looking at a person's qualifications, we look at their skills, and do the skills and experiences they've had match the skills and experiences that that we really need people to do the job. So that's sort of the next frontier. The other thing that's going on that I'm really excited about is we're just about ready to push the button on a couple of pilots focused on hiring neurodiverse talent. So people with autism, dyslexia, that we have learned sometimes have difficulty navigating, particularly the interview process. It's just not, sometimes a good environment. And there's actually a couple of companies out there that specialize in helping employers like us to both find candidates, neurodiverse candidates, help prepare, help us select from whatever pool, help us design a process that is more accessible for those employees to go through. And so we've got two pilots, one in our Cummins electronics business and one in the engine business that we're getting ready to launch here in the next month or so. So we're really excited about that. That's another example of sort of modifying our standard process to make it more accessible for a specific group of people with disabilities.
Thank you, Dennis. Can you hear me? Okay,
Yes.
Sorry, my entire screen is frozen, and so
Oh, no.
people aren't frozen, but all the buttons are frozen. And if I typed in the chat, I couldn't even see what I was typing, so I was worried I was going to lose you all. But wonderful. So I think that's, I think Dennis in Rebekah and each of you really commented on something important where some of this is just instilling those values into the managers and the hiring managers and helping them understand that all people are very diverse and have a variety of backgrounds, and the world of experience is changing, I think, and how people get experience, and that maybe some individuals maybe didn't have that 4 years of college, but they have comparable experience. And so training and teaching our managers and those who are in those roles to be adaptive and willing to go outside their box, maybe of the traditional questions, I think is a really important piece. So Mary, and I also wanted to ask you, as someone who has worked across other businesses as well, are there things that maybe pop into your head, and maybe you don't have one off the top of your head, but that are missing that you've noticed in a student? Just, man, if they just had that would have really helped them get to that employment or get to that volunteer.
I think often it is even seeing examples of people with disabilities working. And so without those models in place, a lot of people then with disabilities are thinking, I just don't fit. I don't see someone who looks like me working in that field or that, in that department. And so I find that is a simple piece that is just it's not seen. I also think people reaching out and asking and saying, we are an employer of choice for people with disabilities. And I think Cummins has been starting to do that as well. People who are actually kind of rolling out the red carpet and saying, we are very interested in talking to you and seeing what you have to offer, even though you're not what we typically are used to. So it's that whole, everyone getting out of their comfort zone and learning how to interact. And that's very difficult for all people. And so I think that's why I think these conversations are so important, where we start open, honest communication. Because I think that's one of the greatest barriers is just simple, open, honest communication of, this makes me uneasy and this is why. And can you help me understand how to do this differently? And so I think that's where I think that this kind of work is very, very important.
Absolutely. And Mary, you touched on the next subject, which I think is important. We talked a little bit about accommodation, but things that make people uneasy. We hear a lot from businesses that maybe if I hire someone with a physical disability, developmental disability, whatever it may be, that they're going to cost me a lot of money because it's going to cost a lot to, provide them accessible equipment, put that accessible doorway in if it's needed. And so can you talk a little bit about maybe some firsthand experiences you've had at your business, or maybe how that assumption may not be true?
And if I can just talk in brief in the small work I've done with helping students work within our local companies, and I'm very pleased with the amount of people who are starting to reach out and say, we're interested in working with you. And when we come in, and either it's myself or it's a teacher or it's a TA, but we support our students and we share that with the managers, they go, wow, that accommodation would be very helpful for all of my employees. If it's a picture schedule, if it's written instructions, if it's frequently asked questions written up, and so there are answers. I mean, it's simple things that we don't realize that if we're providing, which is what we do within our Bcsc with our universal design for learning, where we make sure we remove all obstacles for all people. So what if we were to introduce that to our community and have these obstacles removed for all people? And so I would say those are the things that I've seen and encountered. It's been neat to watch. I get kind of chills when it happens.
So I'm gonna jump in here so Rebekah doesn't have to feel like she has to go for first again or next. We're in the process. We've been working on this already for over a year, building a global workplace adjustments process. We don't currently have a common process for workplace adjustments or accommodations at Cummins. And I'm not an expert, but I've learned a lot about workplace accommodations over the last 12, 18 months. And the cost of accommodations or adjustments is just an excuse. It's just another excuse that it's too hard, it costs too much. It's just an excuse because it's not true. But to Jessica's point earlier about meeting people where they are, you have to educate people and you have to give them data, especially at Cummins, you have to give them data. And George and Mary can appreciate that, especially. And what we found is, the typical, many accommodations don't cost anything. Some can cost a fair amount of money if you're buying a piece of equipment or software for the first time. But I think the average cost of accommodation is somewhere in the neighborhood of a couple $100. And so when we ran the numbers on it, again, benchmarking other companies, what the total dollar figure would be, it's not even a rounding error at Cummins. And so and then you think about the benefits of providing those accommodations and all the people that we could be employing and getting value from. It's insignificant. It's just not a barrier. It shouldn't be. But again, it is something we have to address because people think they know, think they believe, think that cost is an issue.
So I want to add, so I'm going to take this and put my volunteer hat on. We have 250 active volunteers. Active means that 250 people are at one point or another giving us hours during the year. And if you think about your average volunteer, most people are thinking 65 plus, and you would not be wrong. So we're making accommodations all the time because these people are, we have to ask questions about, how are you walking? How are you with sitting long periods of time? So we make accommodations every day. And what we've discovered with volunteering, when you are having people come in and you're filling out a process to volunteer, since I've been in this position, we've had 3 people who have been legally blind who have volunteered for us. We've had people doing other persons with disabilities who volunteered for us. So a lot of that, in terms of seeing people out in the house, as we call it, the broader community of the hospital, our staff are interacting with these volunteers all the time, and they're seeing people who are productive and supportive and efficient, that maybe aren't or maybe have some sort of challenge or need some accommodation. So that's been able to help the whole house learn about those things as we also accommodate our employees as well. Jessica, you want to add anything to that?
No.
I think those are perfect examples. And like Dennis said, it was a bit of a leading question. The data shows that most people who request accommodations do not need accessible or does not cost very much. And so I know this, if you are a small business on this call, $500 could be a big deal to you. And I do know there are grants and opportunities as well that you could tap into. I know as well, unfortunately, there are also some businesses that are just not accessible yet. Maybe they have a step or two, either in an old house or something that hasn't been renovated. And so that begs the larger question, what clients are you missing out on first without being accessible? And also in potential employers, if that's an accommodation someone needs. And, could you bug your landlord, or maybe, set some funds aside to know that investment will ultimately have a long-term benefit for, your business, hopefully, and, the community broader. The other part I wanted to mention, Rebekah made me think of it. It's around job description. So we talk a lot about how when someone reads a job description, any of us really, if sometimes we'll see things on there that we say, oh, can't do that. So completely maybe throw it out. I hear women do this more than men, but if we don't feel that we are fully qualified, we might not apply. And so I seen many job descriptions that list things like, you know, must be able to stand for long periods of time or reach multiple times a day, or do these things that when you look at the actual job, it's not necessarily an absolute requirement. And so looking over your job descriptions and making sure that there aren't barriers like that could be modified. For example, sure, there could be a couple jobs that truly require certain physical requirements. But I've even seen office job descriptions that have these types of things. And so recognizing that, removing just some of that simple wordage and verbiage, that was the word I was looking for, it could be really helpful in those who are looking at your job descriptions and trying to come to your company. All right, so we've got just about 10 minutes left. And so I wanted to ask one more question and then see if we had any opportunity, others who had questions or comments who were on the call. What would be, we've talked about this a little bit, but what would be some advice you might tell a parent who has a child or has an adult child even? Oftentimes we see individuals with disabilities still living with their parents or guardians and are very concerned or worried maybe about the safety or the well-being of individuals who are going to be out and about in the community working. And so what might you say to those parents or guardians who are concerned about this? Mary might have the best answer. Not the best, but she might have some good ideas.
Well, I definitely can tell you that that is a #1 fear for our parents. When I sit in a meeting and we are discussing what a life is going to look like for some of our students with disabilities as they're exiting. And their #1 fear is that, will my child be safe in our community and in a business? And so I think this is a very important discussion, especially to have with employers in our community. And how do we know we're providing safe employment opportunities for our students and for adults that are looking for placement. But I also think in general, our world, especially in our community, is a very open, loving community. And time again, at least with my experience with students and placing them in different environments, they are well received. The customers greatly appreciate working with them. In fact, they add a whole new dynamic that I think helps a business. And so I think it's a matter of just trusting the process a little and allowing kids to maybe have a little, real life opportunities for success and failure. I mean, that is part of growing. And so, so that's kind of where I'm at with parents is let's try, and we're only going to be working with people who are safe.
I would agree with Mary. I have my own children. I've got 2 of them that are on the spectrum, and working with them to find positions and just encouraging them to reach out to employers to look and see. A lot of times it is very daunting to think about looking for employment when you are maybe not feeling very confident in your skills or very confident in your abilities. But I do feel like, again, as a parent, we know the organizations in our community, and we know the organizations and the companies that are hiring. And so having kind of a comfort level, and then also, having resources. We have a lot of people who reach out to me and say, I'm not sure about employment at the hospital. Could I try volunteering first? Could I try an internship? Can I do these types of things first, just to get the comfort level? And that's people with all abilities. That's not just persons with challenges. So just reinforcing, again, like Mary said, trust the process, but also reach out to those people that if you have a connection, if you have a relationship with somebody, reach out and ask them to help you navigate the system or help you understand the system. And that's been really instrumental for me with my two children that are finding that, and with all my kids, even my children that don't have challenges or aren't on the spectrum, just letting them know that there's resources and there's people they can reach out to.
So I think the first thing I would say is I'm sorry as an employer that we're not doing a better job of making space for people with disabilities at Cummins. I think, and employers in general have really failed and continue to, sort of not live up to what we're really capable of in terms of embracing people with disabilities and bringing them into, bring them into the world of jobs and full-time, employment where people can become independent. And so that's the first thing I would say is, I'm sorry. I don't have a child with a disability, so it's hard for me, it's really hard for me to put something out there that might sound, it might expose my ignorance, but I think, and this is maybe building a little bit on what Rebekah said, is I think for us to make progress, we both have to move in the direction of what might feel like taking a risk. And I think we'll find that it isn't as risky as we think it is, but we're not going to give up. We don't want parents or kids with disabilities or people with disabilities to give up. We just need to keep pushing and working together and trying to close that gap.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate your feedback on that. And so we've got a couple minutes left. And so I know we have a variety of people on the call. And so I wanted to offer our panelists, if they had any final thoughts or if others had questions or personal experiences that.
I don't know if I have any personal experiences. We have hired here at Columbus Airport people with disabilities before. And we certainly, as myself, I know a number of you on here. My wife is a special ed teacher on the emotionally handicapped side, and I'm on the board of directors for the Columbus Behavioral Center and the CEC. So I've really always focused myself and my efforts around that. So I'm just glad to hear. Sorry, we were off camera for a while. We actually had lunch here while we were listening to you, though. So it was a great lunch discussion for us. So we appreciate that. But again, appreciate everybody and what you're doing here for our community.
Thank you. Bye.
Grace, I did want to toss one thing in. I've been the director here for 20-ish years. And I can tell you when I got hired, our office was in the old post office on Washington and 7th. It was not accessible. When I went to work the first day, I was like, we're the special ed department and people can't get to us, which I found to be very interesting. So literally going from that to, and obviously when we moved, we are now accessible, but there was no conversation about employment at all. Zero, none. And here we are, though I know it's been a long time, but several of the, actually the largest employers in the community talking about what needs to be done and what they have done in terms of hiring people with disabilities, the school district working with businesses to help everyone understand. And I think working together so that the community is realizing that this is a community issue and conversation. It's not a business. It's not a school. It's all of us. And so I think, though it doesn't seem like we've come far for someone who's been doing this for a while, the fact that we're having this conversation is awesome. And I can tell you that things have changed significantly in the community in terms of employment for people with disabilities over the years. Someone's knocking on my door, so I'm going to go into mute.
Thank you, George.
I'd like to piggyback on that and how much I've appreciated businesses in our community wanting to start small because they are not sure exactly what this could look like. And so I feel like they've been able to reach out to me, and I encourage anyone who is interested in learning, just stepping your toe into it, that we do that with BCSC. We do non-paid internships, paid internships, supported situations that we can help you and your organization along with the ARC. Grace and I work a lot together, and that is a big part of the ARC, and it's something we want to support each other with and support our community is doing fear and stigma training. How can we, let's open the dialogue, let's open up the communication. And if that starts with students, let's start with students. And we've done that within the school with our leadership, with our universal design for learning, which is about removing obstacles for education. And now if we can move that into employment, wouldn't that be a beautiful thing?
Well, one thing we've learned at the sites where we do have site-specific disability inclusion work going on at different places around the world, one of the things we've learned is you cannot do this without an external partner that can help you. And just to give some props to Mary and George, in Columbus before the pandemic came, in 2 years we went from 0 that we knew of kids in our school to work program to 15% of all the kids in our school to work program. I think there was like 65 overall were kids with disabilities. And so it wouldn't have happened without Mary Hamlin and George's support. So you cannot do this work, we don't think, without terrific external partners. So just hats off to you, Mary and George. Appreciate your continued support. And one of these days we'll open the school to work doors back up, I hope.
I'm waiting.
Prior to being here in Columbus, I worked for a defense contractor, and one of our directors in HR had an eye injury that left him partially blind. And so at the time, the organization started having to make changes to be able to impact, to allow him to work. And they realized what we all were talking about. Those accommodations were not big, a modified screen, some things like that. What that led to was a military impact where disabled veterans and or their family members were able to come in. And so what started with one person having a question and how do we make that accommodation opened up another hiring initiative for this defense contractor, which was hiring disabled veterans or their family members. And so I think that's another piece of the puzzle is you find one solution and how many more doors does that one thing open up for you? When that first one might be the hardest one, but the next door, when you hire the second one or the third one or the fourth one, it's a lot easier because you've already proven your business case. You've already put out the money, it's not that bad. And I think they definitely learned a lot in that first case that they worked. So.
Great example.
Grace, I know we're just about out of time, but I just wanted to toss out there the other piece, and Mary stayed in her role as transition coordinator. But BCSC, in addition to the education piece, we also have started looking at ourselves as a business that has to do the same things you all are talking about. How are our job applications? How are our interview processes? What are we looking at? We pretty much have the same departments as any other business. We have technology and, all those things. So we're kind of holding the education side. And then, oh, by the way, we also employ 2,000 people. So what are we doing to improve our stuff? So we're put our toe in the water as well.
Absolutely, Dennis. That's absolutely. That's a perfect example. We know that youth thrive when they see others teaching who are like them, and so growing that is absolutely necessary. So, well, thank you all so much for your time and joining us today. Again, Dennis and Rebekah and Mary specifically for joining and sharing your insights. And please feel free to reach out to myself if you have any questions, and I can help provide or direct you in the right place. We here at the Arc are trying to grow, our connections and our coalition between businesses and figure out, where can we best serve the community. And so really appreciate your time and having these conversations with everyone. So I'll give the rest of your day back to you and talk soon, hopefully.
Thanks, Grace. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
Good to see everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.